Ahoy! How are you? Sorry, geeking out. So, I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about Snow White. I don't know why, but I find this intriguing, and I thought I would share some thoughts with you, a little opinion, if you will. As many of you know, Disney recently did a live-action version of their classic cartoon from 1937. Then it was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937, and today's version is just called Disney Snow White. Now, some of that I think has to do with Peter Dinklage. I'm not certain, I'm just guessing, because he was, as I understand it, quite upset by the fact that they were going to actually cast dwarves, little people, into the seven famous roles. You know, Grumpy, Dopey, Sleepy, Doc, etc. Now, I think Peter's a wealthy man, and I think he was a little short-sighted because there's not a lot of work for dwarves, and this would have been an opportunity for some of those folks to get some screen time in a real way. I think his heart was in the right spot, but he kind of messed stuff up, in my opinion. And I also think maybe he gets caught up in a little of the. In 1937, it's called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, DWARF''S, which I think is a reference to actual dwarves. Now, in 1937 or 38, Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings, and I think that took him into the mid-40s, him writing his masterpiece. And in that novel, he refers to the dwarves that exist in Middle Earth, but he spells dwarves D-W-A-R-V-E-S. V-E-S. And I think that's a reference to the mythical creatures that once upon a time people thought dwarves were. And the Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, well, they were born in like 1785 and 1786. So it's been a minute. And where they were born at that time, it was still called the Holy Roman Empire. It's geographically, it's Germany today, but at that time it was the Holy Roman Empire. And the original fairy tale that they wrote, which I have here, this is the original folk and fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm. But they wrote in 1812 a fairy tale called Little Snow White. It's only 8 pages in this book. It's not it's not Ivanhoe. Anyway, what's interesting is, to me, a lot of people were very upset because I think it's Mark Webb was the director, but whoever developed the live action Snow White made some changes from the 1937 story. And I think Zegler is even famous and chastised for saying, hey, the original was done in 1937, and very evidently so. She kind of says it in a, quite frankly, in a sort of very assholey sort of way. But she's a little girl. She's 22, 23 years, fuck she know. But she wasn't necessarily wrong. Even the Brothers Grimm, who wrote it in 1812, in the incoming years, they did 7 different editions of Little Snow White, making small tweaks here and there. So how can you be upset with the modern 2025 making changes? Now, you don't have to like the changes themselves, but you can't be upset that they made the changes, because even Disney, as you'll see, made changes, just like the Brothers Grimm did. I just said they made 7 different editions over the next few years from the 1812 version, which I have right here. And I want to share a few pieces. I'm not going to read all 8 pages because I know that would be horrifying, and I don't think reading aloud is something you should do. But bear with me. Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, which is beautiful, a beautiful queen was sitting and sewing at a window with a black ebony frame. Now, I think that's a reference. Ebony wood is, I think, West African, but it's expensive today, so it would have been very expensive to get it to the Holy Roman Empire in Germany. So I think someone reading this in 1812 would go, oh, this queen, this bitch is rich. So she's sewing at a window with a black ebony frame. And as she was sewing and looking out the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell on the snow. Now, if you and I read that, 3 drops, you don't think much of it, but 3 is a magical number. 3 is an important number. I don't know how many genies you've gotten out of a lantern. I've had a few. I'm sure you have too. How many wishes does that cat, the genie, give you? 3, right? You don't get 4, you don't get 6. You rub the lantern, out comes the genie, and he's like, I will grant you 3 wishes. Magical. Early Greek, Pythagoras. They talk about past, present, future, birth, life, death, beginning, middle, end. You're starting to get the idea. In religion, Christianity, you have the Holy Trinity. Trinity means 3, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In Hinduism, you have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which is, I think, creator, preserver, and destroyer. Even in Buddhism, you have Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In Judaism, you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So 3 repeats. So it's a magical number. So when you hear 3 drops of blood, I think it would tell someone in 1812, well, something magical is about to happen. The queen said the red looked so beautiful on the white snow that she thought to herself, if I only had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon thereafter, she gave birth, not a stepmother. In the original text, it's a mom. It's the birth mother. Soon thereafter, she gave birth to a little daughter who was white as snow, as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Again, this is not the evil stepmom who's the queen. This is the mother, the birth mother. That's why the child was called Little Snow White. Now, what's interesting is the queen was the most beautiful woman in the entire land and very proud, which is a deadly sin. It's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? You've got envy, wrath, pride, sloth, lust, greed, and gluttony. So this is the first mention of very proud, so pride. It's one of the deadly sins, and I think in 1812, that's kind of a big deal. Today, no one gives a shit. But back then, it's a big deal. Now, she also had a mirror, and every morning she would step in front of it and ask, mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? Now, obviously, this is one of those lines I think was changed so it would be more rhythmic, just my opinion. But the mirror answered that she was the fairest of them all. Once that was said, she knew for certain that there was nobody more beautiful in the entire world. However, little Snow White grew up, and when she was 7 years old, she was so beautiful that her beauty surpassed that of even the queen. And when the queen asked the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all, the mirror, being a straight shooter, basically said, hey, your beauty's quite rare, honey, but little Snow White is 1,000 times more fair. When the queen heard the mirror speak this, she became pale with envy. That's another one of those deadly sins. Now, before everybody loses their mind, Snow White is 7. Back in 1812, the early 1800s, a lot of women were betrothed 11, 12, 13 years old to be married. So saying she was growing up at 7 isn't that out of line. It's like today saying someone's sweet 16, they can get married at 18. I'm not saying they didn't need permission. I don't 100% know, but it's not as offensive. It's offensive, but it's offensive in today's parlance, not then. That's just how it happened. Anyway, I digress. So when the queen heard the mirror speak, she became pale with envy, and from that hour onward, she hated Snow White, her own daughter. And when she looked at her and thought that little Snow White was to blame, that she, the queen, was no longer the most beautiful woman in the world, her heart turned against little Snow White, her daughter. Her jealousy, which is kind of pride, I guess, kept upsetting her. So she summoned the huntsman, we're familiar with this, go stab her to death. This is her 7-year-old kid. Bring her the lungs, her Snow White's lungs and liver. They don't talk about the heart. It's about the lungs and liver as proof of the deed, because she planned to cook them with salt and eat them. I don't really know what that's all about. That's some weird 1812 shit, but you can see no mention of heart. It's lungs and liver. Weird. Anyway, you know this part. The huntsman, takes Snow White out. Snow White begs. The huntsman lets her go. And just when this happens, like a wild boar passes by, so he kills the boar, yanks the heart and liver. Snow White runs off. The huntsman comes back to the queen. Here's the heart and liver. She, of course, boils them in salt, eats them, thinking that's settled now, right? I killed the little girl. I'm most pretty. Meanwhile, Snow White runs around this huge forest, and she finally comes upon a little cottage that belongs to 7 dwarves. Now, in the original story, the dwarves don't have names. They're just magical creatures that go and mine for gold. She gets into the house, and of course, there's 7 little plates with bread and whatnot. And she's smart enough to, because she's hungry, eat a little bit off of each plate. Eventually, she gets tired and goes and lays down, yada, yada, yada. Well, when the dwarfs show up, they notice some of this crap. And basically, this part of the story I don't think changes a whole lot. She basically starts to feed them. They get hot meals instead of cold meals when they come back from the gold mine. And she keeps the place pretty clean. And it seems to be a mutually agreeable situation. The dwarves really like her, and she likes being there. But of course, while this is going on, you guessed it, Queenie, evil mom's talking to the mirror again. And the mirror's like, honey, you're smoking hot, but your kid, she's not dead. She's still hotter. When the queen hears this, she's horrified that the huntsman hadn't killed Snow White. But since she knew that nobody but the 7 dwarves lived in the 7 mountain region, she knew where Snow White was. Okay, I'm not sure how that works exactly, but what she basically does is the queen enchants like laces, a ribbon that you would tie your clothes together, because in 1812 there were no zippers or buttons. So they use laces to, instead of buttons, they would have laces. Well, she enchanted those, and she gave she dresses up as a peasant. The queen goes and visits Snow White. Snow White likes the laces, because who doesn't like laces? And the queen cinches her up so tight that she can't breathe. She passes out on the floor, and the queen assumes she's dead. Rookie mistake. Not part of the Disney story, right? We don't hear anything about laces. The queen leaves really excited, thinking that she killed Snow White. The dwarves come home, see that Snow's laying there on the bed or on the floor. They immediately cut the laces. She starts breathing again. Great. And the dwarves basically chastise her, saying, hey, you got to stop letting people in the fucking house, man. Christ. It's not safe out there. She's like, oh, okay, I won't do it. And the dwarves are like, okay, well, let's eat. Of course, meanwhile, the queen's back in the mirror asking, and the mirror's like, yeah, your beauty is still quite rare, but, Snow White still got you beat. That's when the queen's like, oh, Christ, the laces didn't work. She's not dead. She's so horrified that the blood rushed to her heart when she realized that little Snow White was alive again. So she began thinking day and night how she could put an end to little Snow White. So she made a little poison comb and disguised herself in a completely different shape and went off to the dwarf's cottage again. Now, it sounds to me like, little Snow White's a little slow on the uptake, because she gets a knock again, and there's another old woman who clearly she doesn't recognize, and she's like, I'm not supposed to let anybody in. The queen takes out the comb and shows it to Snow White. It's nice and shiny, and Snow White being Snow White, she's like, ooh, that's pretty, I want that. And the queen, disguised as the peddler woman, says, well, let me comb your hair with it. Well, as soon as she sticks it in the hair, since it's poisoned, which clearly in 1812 they didn't realize that hair wasn't alive, Snow White drops dead. The queen / peddler is super excited, heads back to the castle. Of course, the dwarves show up, see Snow White yet again laying on the ground, but they see the comb, pull the comb out. She wakes up. They give her a rash of shit about letting strangers into their house. The queen goes back, mirror, mirror on the wall, and once again, goddamn, Snow White's still alive. She can't seem to get this right. So this is when the queen enters a secret chamber where no one was allowed to enter. Once inside, she made a deadly poisoned apple. On the outside, it looked beautiful with red cheeks. Anyone who saw it would be enticed to take a bite. Thereafter, she disguised herself as a peasant woman, apparently a different peasant woman, and went to the dwarf's cottage and knocked on the door. Little Snow White looked, and she's like, man, I'm not allowed anybody in. I keep getting shit from the dwarves. The woman's like, well, that's fine. If you don't want an apple, someone will buy it. Look at this apple. It's smoking hot. This is a nice apple. Snow White again repeats, man, I'm not allowed anybody in here. I'm going to get my ass kicked. These dwarves are going to lose their fucking minds. Anyway, the apple was made with such a cunning that only the red part was poisoned. Apparently there was a little white part that wasn't. So the peasant said, well, hey, I'll cut the apple in half. I'll have a bite. You can have a bite. And I'll just pass it through the window. So there's sort of I won't let anybody in. They don't have, the window. Okay, we'll pass it through the window. Snow White takes a bite. As soon as she takes a bite of the apple, she falls to the ground and was dead. The queen dances a jig, goes back to the mirror, asks the mirror the question, mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? And the mirror's like, you are, baby. Everybody's happy. Now I can rest in peace. I'm the most beautiful in the land, and Snow White will remain dead this time. So the dwarves come home from the mines that evening. They found little Snow White lying on the ground, and she was dead. They unlaced her, tried to find something in her hair, and none of that worked. So they laid her on the table, and all the seven dwarves, sat down and wept and cried, and for probably 3 or 4 days. They noticed that she still had pretty red cheeks. She wasn't decaying in any way. So they made a glass coffin, which I think is important. In 1812, glass is common today, but it wasn't common then. Glass was hard to make. You gotta melt sand, right? So once again, these dwarves are mythical creatures. They're able to make a coffin out of glass. And they put gold letters on and added the family name, and they wrote her name on it, and one dwarf remained home every day to watch over her. They just left her in this glass coffin. So little Snow White laid in the coffin for a long, long time, but she didn't rot, right? She never decayed. She was still white as snow and red as blood. And if her eyes would have been open, they would have been black as ebony, for she lay there as if she were sleeping. Now, it just so happens a prince came upon the dwarf's cottage one day, and he needed a place to sleep. It's pretty beat. The dwarves were like, yeah, that's fine. And when he entered the little room that Snow White was in, she's lying in the coffin with the 7 candles. He couldn't get enough of her beauty. He then read the inscription and saw that she was a princess, because technically she was a princess. And then he pleaded with the dwarves to give little Snow White to him as a gift, because he couldn't live without gazing upon her. And he would honor her and hold her in high regard as the most beautiful thing in the world, etc., etc. Well, the dwarves took some pity on him and gave him the coffin, and the prince had carried it to his castle. It was then placed in his room, where he himself sat the entire day and couldn't take her eyes off her. That's a little creepy, but okay, I get it. She's hot. Let's see, I lost my place. Couldn't take her eyes off her. Placed in the room, eyes off. And when he had to leave the room and he couldn't see Snow White, he became sad. So he basically had his servants carry the coffin from place to place in the castle all the time. And eventually they became angry about this. And one time the servant opened the coffin and lifted little Snow White into the air and said, why must we be plagued with so much work because of this dead maiden? Picked her out of the coffin, and kind of the first Heimlich maneuver, because upon saying that, a little piece of apple that was stuck in her throat popped out, and she became alive again. Now, when the prince saw that dear Snow White was alive, he rejoiced. He didn't know what to do. So they sat down at dinner and ate with delight. A wedding was planned for the next day, so it's quick in the Holy Roman Empire. And Snow White basically invited the evil queen, her mom, to attend. When the queen stepped in front of the mirror replied, "You're pretty hot, but once again, Snow White's 1,000 times more fair." When she heard this, she was horrified, became so afraid, so very afraid she didn't know what to do. However, her jealousy drove her so much that she wanted to be seen at the wedding. When she arrived, she saw little Snow White was a bride. Iron slippers were then heated over an open fire, and the queen had to put them on and dance in them. Her feet were so miserably burned that she had to keep dancing in them until she danced herself to death. That's the end of Little Snow White. Well, I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot to unpackage there. My point in this 20-minute rant is basically to say stories change. Even the Grimm brothers, who authored the story, made 7 changes over a few years because I think it was a very popular tale. And understanding the time period that it was written helped us understand that she was 7. I think the 3 drops of blood is interesting. I think the 7 deadly sins. But Mr. Walt Disney made some changes to the original story to make it work for the 30s. And it became a huge, huge success. Revered the world over. Made Walt Disney who Walt Disney is. I like the cartoon. I think I said it, I don't remember, but in the book, the dwarves don't have names. I don't know when the names came about. I'll say it was Disney. I don't think that's true, but for purposes of this, we'll say it was Disney. So he made some changes. I don't know that anybody in 1937 was going, "Hey, you didn't go from the original. You got an evil stepmother," because the Grimm brothers added a stepmother in version 4. No one got upset about it. They just took it for what it was. You either liked it or you hated it. And I think the same is true today. Snow White 2025 is no different. They made some changes. Now, again, you don't have to like the changes. I think some of the changes they made are stupid and they're tied to our weird agendas of today. But the only ones that ultimately suffer are the cats that footed the bill for this nonsense. If it had been a big hit, great. You know, some things don't stand the test of time. There's lots of movies you watch and you're like, oof, you know, today that's not really acceptable. But at one time that it was. And making changes to a story is always acceptable. They made some changes. If you don't dig them, that's fine. Again, I haven't seen the movie. I'm not particularly interested in seeing it. When it comes out on Disney Plus, I'll watch it. I'm not going to go spend $20 to see it. I'm too cheap. But anyway, I digressed a bit. One of the lessons, I think, for anybody, when they start prattling off on stuff they don't know about, is because they haven't done any research. And you know where research is found? They hide information. You've heard me say it. You know where information's hidden? In books. Crack one. Look, I tabbed it. I looked it up. I read it. I did a little bit of research. I didn't do that much research. People will rip me apart for this. But I'm onto something. Everybody just calm down. It's just a movie. Who cares? You can watch the 37 version and be happy. If that one doesn't do it for you, you can read one of the 7 versions. I have the original. I don't have the others. Whatever you want to do. Anyway, I prattled on long enough. In this world, when you can be anything you want, you be kind, be humble, be forgiving, and again, do your own digging and information before you go crazy. Talk to you later. Bye.